I had an inkling while I was attending university. Everything, I need to go back to my family system, because my family system is, I was born in Germany. I was adopted to a family. I was an only child. And my mother was a German national. My father was an American serviceman. And they couldn't have children together because of the RH factor back in those days in 1959.
Right.
So I was adopted. And these were two people that did their best and really were not equipped to be good parents. My father was abusive. My mother was, I can characterize her as helpless, actually. I can remember when I was 14, he was just raging. And I remember asking my mother, because I've always had quite an independent streak, I remember saying, why don't you just go, Mom? Just go. And I remember her saying, where would I go? What would I do? And at 14, that was pretty stunning to me. And I can remember thinking, I'm not going to be you. And I think because of the adoption, I didn't have that extra link, So as I grew up, I realized that when I had kids, I would not parent like them. And as I got older, I realized I didn't know how else to do that. And so that was giggling in my mind. Later on in my teens, in my late teens, I was dating someone who was going to university, and he was working himself through university, which I didn't know was a thing because I was quite naive during that time. My parents, I can characterize them now as being neglectful, which I didn't really realize they were until just recently, but I just didn't get talked to. I didn't get information. I didn't understand a lot of stuff. So this man was going to university and working himself through, and he said, you could do that too. And I said to my parents, yeah, I'd like to do that. And they said, oh, great, knock yourself out. We can't help you. We're not going to help you. And so I cocktailed my way through university. I was a cocktail waitress, and I did daycare, and I did car restocking. I mean, you name it, but mostly cocktail waitressing, and got myself to university. And I realized when I finished university, that was probably that's when I got the most clarity. I thought, well, I don't want to, because this partner then at that point wanted to do the whole family thing. And I kind of went, no, I've worked 5 years now to get a university degree and a teaching credential. And I want to do this. I don't want to have kids, even though part of the reason why teaching attracted me was so I could stay home during the summer with the children but also, part of the reason why teaching was appealing to me is because by that time, my mother, bless her heart, had given me the travel bug. So she had taken me over to meet my relatives when I was 14. And I loved traveling, and I wanted to keep doing it. And so even during my university years, I'd save up a whole bunch and then travel. And then 2 years later, I'd have so save up, travel for, about every 2 years, I'd make it overseas somehow. And so that became, and, just opening my eyes like that. But that was probably the first time I actually said it out loud, was I said, no, I'm not ready for this, and then time went on, and I started to teach, and I realized that I didn't know how to do the parenting better. And so then it started kind of the idea of not having kids starting to blossom. And I can remember, and I'm an only child, and I'm actually got a lot of, I talk to myself a lot. and I can remember, saying to myself, if you make this decision, you're going to regret it by the time you're 60, 65. You know that, right? That you didn't have kids. Everybody else had kids. Are you prepared to live with that? And I remember saying to myself, yeah, because I can't do it better. And I'm not going to put a kid through what I knew. Because usually, as we know, statistically, you parent the way you were parented. Unless you have a big intervention in there. And I didn't think I could do it any better, and I still, my early years of teaching, when a kid would get sassy, I still was tempted to smack them because that's what I knew. And I learned to deploy alternatives at that point when I was a teacher, because you can't smack children. And it turned out that I actually quite liked children, but also my decision continued to be supported during my early career in teaching, because I've always worked in inner city districts. I've always worked with marginalized kids. And even up here, I used to teach up here in the Māori community, which is a real under-resourced community. And I saw a lot of throwaway kids. I saw a lot of neglected kids. I saw a lot of kids that clearly were not wanted. And I can remember thinking, this is not anything I need to be part of.
That was beautifully put,
Yeah.
Esther. I
Yeah.
mean, seeing how your parents treated you and just growing up in that environment, it makes a lot of sense. And you had the kind of the awareness to go, I may fall into a pattern here if I do this myself. I may carry, and that's something that we hear a lot in our community. There's a
Yeah.
fear of repeating that, and that's incredibly valid.
Yeah, it was. It was. Subsequently, I went on to get a master's degree in counseling, in marriage, family, childhood counseling. And
Ah,
one thing that I realized was that I was pretty committed to having the dysfunction stop with me.
right.
And by that time, I had the words to really understand it and to
Yeah.
define it and to stand in my own commitment of it.
Mm.
So, yeah.
What was the reaction then to, did your mom or your dad say anything about you not wanting kids or?
I went on to marry a man that didn't want kids also, which was actually, which worked well. And he's a lovely man. He still is an environmentalist. I met him in Greenpeace. and,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and he didn't believe that you had a right to have more than one kid or more than two children as a couple to replace yourself. And in the end, he really
Okay.
didn't feel, like
Wow.
he had that desire to have kids, and I didn't either. So we fit well together. When we told my parents about that, they didn't believe, I don't think they believed us, to be honest with you.
Right.
And, and my parents were of a different generation, the World War II, my mother growing up in Nazi Germany. I think
Mm.
they were really committed to some traditional things that they wanted to see. So grandkids were
Mm.
always in their picture, and they were disappointed. I remember one of the, unpacking some moments in your life, and one of the things that really still makes me sad when I think about it to this day is when my partner and I told my parents that we were divorcing, because we divorced after a number of years. I remember the first thing out of my dad's mouth, not "How are you? Are you okay? Is he okay?" First thing out of his mouth is, "I
Yeah.
guess there's no grandbabies then."
Wow.
First thing out of his mouth. And it's like, and I said,
Gosh.
Daddy, we've always said that we're not going to have kids. And he said, "Oh, I guess I was hoping you'd make a mistake."
Oh,
He was also the man that told me if I ever got pregnant, not to bother coming home because he'd turn me out on the street. So this is the
seriously.
same man. So, huge dysfunction there, no shadow work, no reflection.
No,
you
no,
know,
nothing.
exactly. So, this is,
Gosh.
yeah. So, ultimately, I can remember at that moment thinking, man, am I glad I didn't have kids, because I wouldn't have brought them
Right.
around to you as grandparents anyway. And
Such
then I'd
a,
have to face that challenge with the two of you,
mm,
and again, when you're 67, you're able to reflect down that long tunnel of your life and go,
mm,
they did the best they could. They both had trauma in their lives. They both had unaddressed trauma in their lives. They did the best they could, But I
yeah,
was, I can remember my response to my father when he said that was, if you wanted grandkids that bad, Daddy, you should have had more than one kid. I'm not
right.
put all your eggs
Exactly.
in one
Exactly.
basket, because I'm not, you knew from early on that
Yeah.
this was not probably going to be me. Yeah.
But it's such a wild thing for me to think as a parent that you would put that kind of pressure and expectation on a child. It's, to me, I just don't understand that. I know it's like something we're sold this vision, right? First, it's the vision of the children, the husband, the partner, the house, the kids. Then you get grandkids, and then you live out your life with this vision of that. So when that doesn't happen, there's a yeah, it's a time to rethink. You have to rethink
Mhm.
what your future might look like. But it's just crazy that someone could really vocalize it in such a harmful, hurtful way to a child that they are apparently meant to love. That must
Mhm.
have broke your heart. It just must have, you didn't need that. At that moment, you did not need that, you
No,
know?
no, it was, yeah. But, by that time, fortunately, I had done a lot of my own work. And so I was able to kind of understand where he was coming from.
Mm.
But the understanding doesn't make it any less painful. Yeah,
No.
yeah,
And I mean,
yeah.
we hear from people who they have that pressure from their parents and they
Hmm.
are in turmoil for years
Hmm.
because they think they
Yeah,
need to give grandkids to their parents, which is,
exactly. Like it's not your life. like it's their
Right,
life for
right.
them to
Yeah.
make decisions around, which
Mm,
was never, I have to admit, my case. I was strong-willed when I was younger. I was quite an independent, even despite my naivety growing up in my kind of low information childhood, because I didn't understand a lot in the world. And
mm,
growing up, I still tended to rebel. My father and I were always at
I
odds.
see.
And part of it is because my mother is a different animal. And so I didn't like the way he treated her. And then he
Mm,
tried to treat me that way. And I got into a lot of scraps with him because I wasn't interested in having him dominate me the way he dominated my mother. So,
no.
yeah.
So it was a relief to leave their house and go out and get
Yeah.
out there into the world.
I needed to do that. I would, even when my relationship with that gentleman that went to university, even when that failed, I didn't move back home. I was still a student, and I didn't move back home. I ended up living in my car for a couple weeks,
Wow.
and then getting an apartment, and just scraping by. And I can remember when I went to my parents' house because I would regular visit, do laundry. My mom would make dinner. You know, it wasn't like a conflicted relationship where we were always
Right.
at odds. But you know, I
Mm,
would come back and I remember them asking. Now, mind you, they didn't ask very often, but I remember them asking, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, in my car, but I found an apartment." You know, I can remember my
mm,
dad breaking down and saying, "I can't believe you didn't think you could come home." And I thought, and
mm.
I didn't have the words at the time. So,
Right.
but I remember thinking, why would you think I could come home? You were the one that told me that you
Yeah.
know, I wasn't welcome unless I met your very strict criteria, you know?
Mm,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
They have very, yeah, parents can sometimes have this very, yeah, narrow definition of what they want you to be like. And if you don't fit
Exactly.
inside of that, it's painful for you, painful for them as well. And I just feel
Yeah.
like if people could accept, if parents could accept their kids for they're completely different, and especially being adopted, I mean that's a whole other level of like, complication.
One
It's
would think
another
they
level.
wanted me.
Right. I mean, and
Yeah.
yeah, but clearly back in their generation, maybe it was just like we'd need to have kids. Maybe it
I think
was
that's
like
what it
a
was. I think that's very
right.
much what it was. I think there was a
Mm,
traditional vision they both had. And again, they weren't equipped to do the work.
right.
You know, it was a different time. You know, my
Mm,
father lived through World War II. He actually spoke more about that experience to my ex-husband than he ever did to me. He
mm,
got along quite well with him. And yeah, my mother also, you know, Nazi Germany, I can't even imagine the things that she saw and experienced, and she shared very little of it. In fact, I learned more about her life then through subsequently visiting my relatives in Germany, which I did often after that. So it's just,
right.
yeah, just you know, a lot of that. I think there's a time there was a time when people just kind of put all that in a box and closed it up and just got on
Yeah.
with it and didn't understand that those kinds of consequences from trauma like that come out in a different way.
Mm.
Yeah, and and you know, I'm not gonna. I've gone on beyond the blame thing. It just I understand them, but I'm glad I made the choices I did despite them.
Yes, absolutely. So you didn't have the best reactions from your family. What about, people around you, colleagues or
You know,
friends?
I
How were
was looking
they?
at that, and you know, I found what I found was the people my early friendships in my early life, the ones that went on and got married and had kids, tended to drift away from me,
Mm,
and I ended up remaining close friends with the people that were like me, the people that chose not to have kids. I was thinking, because now obviously I was in Seattle then and Sacramento actually also, and now I'm in New Zealand. I was kind of reflecting on the friends that I've got left in my circle now, which are mostly
yeah.
in Seattle, and they're all childless. You know, I've got a
Mm,
few, and they're all older women too. And at this point, a lot of the older women have grown kids. So kids aren't a factor. So there's that first time in your life in your 20s and 30s and 40s where everything's around the kids. So I'm going to do
yeah.
this with the kids, or, you know, bring the kids, and I didn't have that dynamic. And so it just
Right.
didn't fit for me. So
Hmm.
I have been really blessed with a cadre of friends and acquaintances who are childless somewhat. Either they're grown and gone or they never had
Hmm.
kids. And so, and what I found about now this is, I don't want to, this is a different experience that someone else would have had. But I found that early on, when I was socializing with my friends who had kids, the focus of the conversation was always their kids, what my kid
Right.
did, what your kid did, how they were feeling, what they did, what kind of sickness they just had. And I just couldn't, it just wasn't my world. I couldn't relate.
Yeah.
So it was quite effortless and quite natural for me to move into circles that were more like me, where we could talk about other things. And so I found the depth and the satisfaction of those conversations suited me better because
Yeah.
we would talk about other things, like
Right.
being a woman in the 1980s.
Yes.
It's just like,
Yes. So maybe some interesting topics, and
well, I
yeah.
didn't want to say that, but that's what it was. It was just
Yeah.
I can remember going away from a baby shower one time and just wanting to jump off something high because it was just like
Same.
I
Yeah.
this is not I don't and I can remember viscerally feeling afraid that I was going to end up that my world was going to be that small, and I didn't want that. By that time I traveled a lot, and it was really unappealing. And that is
Mhm.
not to say that world is not valid as well.
No. No.
Other people made that decision, and that I honor that, but it
Yeah.
sure wasn't going to be for me.
No. No.
you
Same,
know
Esther.
I
Same. Yeah.
mean, any kid I'd have, I'd be thrown in a backpack and taken to Turkey or something. I'm sure that's what I'd have to that's what I would have been
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, oh god. I mean, yeah, like I have such admiration. Like we're on the road, so we'll see some parents. Lots of them are
Hmm.
younger parents, and we had one couple next to us, and they had an actual newborn. They were on their maternity leave, and they were like, "I'm just we've got like 8 months." So we actually they were from Germany, and we were like, "We've got all this time," so we thought we'd just get in a van. And I was like, "Well done for just
Awesome.
doing something
Yeah.
different and making the
Hmm.
most of that time."
Yeah.
But yeah, when you see how you're right, your world can go so insular. And I don't
Yeah.
know if is it because society tells women that once you have a child, that's it. That's your duty and it should be your value. And I don't know. What do you think?
I actually think it's really appropriate. I think it's the safety of the species because when you're
Right.
a mother, I think it's really appropriate to have your entire focus be on making sure that child is
Mm.
well and healthy and nourished and
Hmm.
thriving. I think that's important. I really do.
Yeah,
It
it
was
is.
not a commitment that I was willing to make. And it was another
Mm.
part of it was that I've had, call it serial monogamy. I've had more than one partner in my life for long periods of time. And
Hmm.
I knew early on that I wasn't going to remain with the father of a child I had. And I didn't want to be a single parent because I saw too much of that in my teaching and
Right.
how hard it was. And
Yeah.
so there's that. I think
Yes.
that women, I think the hormones kick in and train your brain to focus on the health and safety of that child, which is completely appropriate. And I honor
Yeah.
that. I think that should be your focus. And again,
Yes.
it wasn't, I never, I missed that memo in this life.
Mm.
There
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah.
in fact, there was at one point at my old school in Seattle, there were 8 women. There was a staff of 65 and 8 women were pregnant.
Wow.
And we used to laugh about there was something in the
Wow.
water. And
Yeah.
at that time,
Yeah.
I was head of the language arts. And so we used to have these regular monthly meetings. And I can remember one of the women that had just given birth came to attend the language arts staff meeting after school, and she brought the baby. And it all just fell apart. And all the women rushed to the corner to woo with the baby, And I can
Oh yeah.
remember thinking, what's wrong with me? I have zero.
Right.
Yeah, babies just they're little blobs, and I don't really
Yeah.
like babies until they become like little human beings where there's somebody living in their eyes. And I can
Yes.
remember
Yeah.
saying jokingly, and I really offended people. I remember saying, "Can I bring my dog next time? Why did I
I would
bring
have loved that.
yeah, why did I bring my dog?" Because it was just so
Yes.
interesting how
Yes.
all the women in the room dropped everything and ran to the
Right.
corner to coo over the
Mm.
baby, which
Mm.
like I said, I missed the memo. I just, by that,
Me too.
by that
Me
time,
too.
and, it's not to say babies aren't wonderful, and I'm sure they bring a lot of joy. And I used to get that a lot. I used to get from women that had children, oh, it's different when it's your own. You'll regret,
Mm.
all those things
Oh yeah,
that they
you'll change your mind, you'll
yeah,
regret it.
yeah. Well, I actually believed it. I did. I believe them.
Oh,
They
really?
said, it'll be different when it's your own. You'll really regret it by the time you're in your 60s. And actually I lived with that for decades, that I knew I would,
Mm,
and I never did. And that's why I wrote you, because
yes.
as time went on, I'm just here to tell you, at 67, every decade gets better. I don't know about people with children, but I know my life, every decade just blows me out of the water. Every decade, I think, oh my goodness, how could I have envisioned something so amazing? And then
Wow.
the next decade comes, it's like, oh my goodness. And here I am in New
Mm,
Zealand, living in like
wow.
a treehouse in the bush, and
Yeah.
just loving my life. I'm with a
Mm.
wonderful partner. And I couldn't have painted this any more beautiful.
I mean, that just fills me with so much joy just hearing that. I mean, because society does tell women as we age, basically, once you hit menopause, your life is over. You're no longer of value, and then you start to age, and then we don't like you, and it's like society tells us these horrific things. But every time I speak to an older woman, they are an older child-free woman, they absolutely love their life and they do not have regrets, and they're creating these incredible lives for themselves, no one else. So society really loves to push these myths and narratives, and it's just sad, isn't it, that so many people
Yeah.
also push them. That means that so many women out there hear this, and it causes them turmoil, and it caused you that kind of turmoil for years, thinking, well, I guess the penny's going to drop at
Yeah,
some point and I'll
exactly,
be like,
exactly. It's gonna someday I'll regret this. Well,
and it's
I
not
mean,
happened.
we're still, unfortunately, in a patriarchal system and a hierarchical system, and the system is built to sustain itself. So we're
Right.
all foot soldiers in that,
Mm,
and it's kind of what I, in my 30s, 40s, probably 20s and 30s actually. I got a lot of that feedback from women who are having kids, and it's almost like proselytizing. It's almost
mm-hmm.
like, we want you to be on our team because somehow or
Right.
another that's going to validate my choices more.
That's it.
And it's like, and
That's
I
it.
think that's probably why my friendship group gravitated towards non-child people,
Mm,
because I fundamentally, I think I was a threat to women who had children
right.
because, and this is just anecdotally and 42 years of teaching, I suspect there are more women than care to admit that wish they hadn't had kids. And I think that's a real shameful thing for them to consider or admit.
Right.
I've seen people that clearly didn't want their kids and didn't even like them.
Right.
And I think it would be such a healthier society if we gave a little grace to women that made choices other than going in the traditional route, and
Mm,
supported women that way. Because
mm-hmm.
it would be lovely if we had every child on the planet be a wanted child.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's why I really think that the work that I'm doing, it's not just for child-free women, it's for all women to know
absolutely,
there's a choice. Because
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think you've seen it. You've seen what happens when someone
Oh,
has a child that they don't want, and
yeah,
it's heartbreaking,
it
and
is. It is.
it's hard to keep seeing that happen again and again. So I really feel like the more that we get out stories like yours, Esther, to show people that it's okay if you don't want to have this thing that society is telling you you should want.
Yeah,
It's okay to say,
yeah,
actually, I don't feel like I want this. You will be fine. You will be more than
mhm,
fine. So
yeah.
your story is going to help those people recognize that there is a choice. But yeah, it breaks my heart just to know how many
Oh, yeah.
unwanted children we bring into this world.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's all kinds of there's many levels of suffering that children
Right.
experience. And even
Yeah.
though you don't come to school with bruises, they come to school with a lack. When
Yep.
I was writing to you, one of the things I started counting, and there's been a couple of thousand children I've impacted over
Wow.
my career because I
Wow.
did secondary for half my career, primary, and there's a lot of there are many moments that I had with students that I know made a difference. that I
Mm.
know made them feel, gave them a little glimpse of safety. And
Oh yeah.
that was my gift, growing up with parents like that. I knew that I wasn't going to speak to children like that. I knew that I wasn't going to treat children like that.
Mm.
I knew what not to do. And then over
Right.
4 decades, I learned better, better strategies.
Is that why you got into teaching in the first
You
place, do
know,
you think?
I got into teaching because teachers in those days got summers off. And whenever I went overseas, I used to go for 6 weeks at a time because by the time you pay for a plane ticket, it's no use going for 2 weeks. So I used to
Right.
go. And the only, in those days, I don't know how it is in America now, but in those days, very few careers gave you 6 weeks off.
Mm.
And so that was literally why I got into teaching. One of my first jobs, getting myself through university, was I worked at a daycare, and I worked
Okay.
with 3-year-olds. And the woman who owned the daycare, she came to me one day. It was just early in that job, a couple of weeks. And she said, "How are you enjoying it?" And I said, "I'm really enjoying it," because I loved working with the 3-year-olds. They were just kick-ass fun. They were just fun.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying, I said, how am I doing? And she said, "Oh, this is your calling. You're a natural.
Wow.
This is your calling."
Oh.
And, when you're, what, 21, when someone says that to you, you kind of go, "Really?" I never thought I had a calling, and
Right.
it's stuck in my brain a little bit. So teaching was one of
Mm.
those. And also remember, this was like 76. I graduated from high school. In the 70s, there weren't, I really wanted to be a marine biologist. That's what I
Oh
wanted.
wow.
And
Right.
I subsequently I realized I probably would have been a good one, because my mind is, I have a science brain, I have a
Okay.
curiosity brain, and
Mm.
but my this is just so typical misogyny. But I never was really good in math in those days,
Mm.
and the counselor, high school counselor at the time, said, "We're not good enough in math to do that." Boom,
Ugh.
just shut me down. And
Oh.
ironically, I ended up for many years when I was teaching primary, teaching teachers how to teach math,
No
because
way.
I was really good at teaching math. Uh, but
Ah,
it was
it's
just, it was
crazy
one of
when
those
this
things.
happens.
But like you
Mm.
say, every road that you choose means there's a million other roads you don't choose.
Right.
So, and I
That's it.
really believe that there are no accidents in the universe. I really
Right.
believe that the path you're on exactly the right path all the time. But I'll
Yes.
never forget old Harvey Dunn. It's just like, and
Oh,
that was another little seed planted of how not to be a counselor.
right. Right. Yeah, I won't be doing it like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's it. When you're younger like that, you are impressionable, right? I mean,
Mm,
people say things to you, whether it's, hey, you'll regret this, or hey, you'll change your mind, or you don't
yeah,
maybe have that confidence in yourself and know
exactly,
you
exactly.
and you trust these supposed professionals,
You
quote
do,
unquote.
you do.
And then
Yeah,
they're just people. They're just
it's just,
people with
oh yeah,
ideas.
exactly, exactly. And I came from a family system that didn't really support independence.
No,
So,
no,
this was, in those days, nursing and teaching were real good, solid, traditional, respected
right.
professions for women. I knew I needed a profession because I
Mhm.
wasn't going to be, where would I go? What would I do? So I had to have something. I had to have a plan because I knew
That's
I
it.
wasn't going to put all my eggs in my
Mm-mm.
husband to take care
No.
of me, because I knew
Mm,
that was a gamble and my mom had lost
yes.
that gamble.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yes. So yeah, you never wanted to repeat that
right.
mistake. Let's
Yeah.
call it a mistake, but it's
Um,
it's hard when you grow up. It's like you are conditioned into these choices and lives, and it's
mm,
not mistakes. Probably not the right word. It's because my heart breaks for the women who kind of are they have no options. They
yeah,
just don't have
she was stuck.
yeah
She was stuck. But,
yeah.
and it's like, I do tarot cards. So for me, she always
Oh
reminded me
yeah
of the Eight of Swords. That woman that's all bound, and all she has to do is turn
yeah.
around and go like this, and she'd be free. And,
Wow yeah
so it was a prison of her own making, just like my
yeah.
father.
Mm,
And it was, I know that she's gone on to a better place. I wish I was braver and had more skills while they were both alive to have some of those conversations that I might have been able to
mhm.
have,
Right.
next time around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a really you know, you had enough on your plate. You had to
Yeah.
focus on yourself and get yourself out of that kind of life, and it
Yeah.
took a lot of work and a
Yeah.
lot of courage, and you
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. But how did you get then from Germany to Seattle? What was the link there?
It was via like California. I was born in 59. My parents had been married since 55. My father, he's such an interesting paradox because my father, when I knew him, he was quite, like you say, insular. His world was right
Right.
here. However,
Mm.
he had a gift for languages. So when my mom met him, he was speaking German and French and English, and he actually interviewed my mother for immigration. That's how they met. So they were married
Okay.
in 55, and he was so gifted with languages, they transferred him from Heidelberg, where I was born, to Monterey in California, where the military had a language school, and he studied and learned
Ah.
Romanian there. And I didn't know that man. He was
Mm.
gone by the
Wow.
time I came conscious of him. I didn't know who that
Right.
man was. And then he went off to Korea. So I think that he had several
Mm.
deployments that I think were really stressful for him. My father, fundamentally, I think, was a real sensitive man. It wasn't safe to be sensitive in those days, so
No.
just everything's, yeah. And
Mm.
yeah, so I was then imported, from Germany to Fort Belvoir in
Yeah.
Virginia when they got transferred back over stateside. And then we went right away to Monterey. So I was
Okay.
naturalized when I was 4 in
Okay.
the
Wow.
States. Yeah. But I have no memory of that. you
No.
know, and then I grew up on the West Coast in America.
Okay.
And so that's why my accent, I
Right.
was blessed. My first language was German. And,
Yeah.
because my grandparents used to come on a boat and stay for 10 months at a time with us on the West Coast to visit my mom, which was lovely. My grandparents were lovely. They were kind of whole
Yeah.
people and
Okay.
and spoke German. And then my
Mm.
mom, because she had gotten so much pushback coming into the United States in 1959 with a German accent. My mom spoke fluent English, but she had a German accent. And she was really mocked and derided, and she really felt she always had a one down because of her
Okay.
accent. So by the time I hit 5 years old, my mom forbade my grandparents speaking to me in German because she was so afraid I would have an accent.
Wow.
Now, of course, we know the research shows if you learn two languages simultaneously or more, actually it
Yeah.
just really builds more pathways in your brain. So it actually was counterintuitive. But she was concerned
Right.
for me. So then when I went back into Germany for the first time to visit, I I spoke what I'll call baby Bayerish, baby Bavarian.
Oh yeah.
I understood the syntax, I had some vocabulary, but it was very childlike.
Right.
Subsequently, I would go back and then speak with them for a couple of weeks. So it brings it
Mm.
back. So I can converse in Bavarian and I understand it all,
Right.
but I'm still not
Right.
as fluent as I would have been. So that's how I
Right.
got there.
Yeah.
And then Sacramento became a place that was just it wasn't working for
Mm.
me and my partner at the time anymore. We were looking for some place that was a little bit more outward looking, probably a
Mm.
little bit more enlightened. You've been to Seattle. Seattle's
Yeah.
it's quite a counterculture, kind of highly educated city. Loved it there.
Yes.
And I
Mm.
love live performances, so the theater is really thriving, or at least it used to. I left in 2007, but it was just very much my city. I love Seattle. Seattle will always be my heart
Yeah.
home. Always be my heart home.
Oh yeah. It's an amazing place.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask Esther, did you ever connect with your biological family, or were you that was it?
Yeah,
No.
I did. I did. I did. Part of it is why I went on to obtain a master's degree in
Wow.
counseling, because I did. I in Germany is kind of strange because I was given when I became an adult, my parents gave me all my adoption papers, which are all like written in German. Unfortunately, I can read them. And on a
Mm.
birth certificate in Germany at that time, I don't know how it is now, they list your mother's name and her address because in
Oh
Germany in
wow.
those days people never leave.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I won't go into the series of interesting events that led to it, but I put myself at one point in the town where her address was and
Wow.
looked her up in the phone book and the family still lived there and I called.
Wow,
And
amazing.
because that's what you do when you're 18 and silly. You know?
Wow. So were you scared? Were you kind of
I don't know.
or
I
excited or
think knowing what I know about feelings, my heart was thumping, so that's fear. So probably I
yeah,
was, but I was just so, at this point, you have nothing to lose at that point when you're 18.
true. Yeah.
My uncle, her brother, picked up the phone, and it was interesting. And he said, "Who?" Finally, I asked about. I won't say their name. I asked about this person, and they said, "Well, they're in London with their husband." And I went, "Oh." And finally, he said, "Who is this?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a friend. I'm a friend of hers."
Oh
You
wow.
know, I'm 67. It's so funny. You look back and you go, "Oh my gosh, Esther, I can't believe how silly you were." You know, and he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Where are you?" And in those days, it was because it was in the 70s. We didn't have cell phones. I was in the
Mm,
telephone. They had little telephone hoizitals at the post
right.
office. And so the
Wow.
bus dropped me off because I took a bus to this town. So the bus dropped me off at the post office, and there was a phone. So I just picked up the payphone. I said, "I am at the
Yeah.
telephone hospital of the post," and he said, "I'm coming down," because this is a
Oh
Dorf.
gosh.
This is a little town. This is like that big town.
Yeah.
And he came down and he got out of the car and he looked at me and he said, "I know who you are."
Wow.
And
Oh
of
wow.
course, your stomach drops and you go,
Mm,
and and what happened was I had a correspondence with him subsequently for a few years. He set up a meeting with my biological mother. We were able to spend several days together. It
mm,
was, and as an adopted person, many adopted people might be able to relate to this. I looked for people who looked like me all my life because
mm,
I was very sensitive to family resemblances because I didn't have one. And I
right.
always was looking. It's like, well, who do I look like? Because I just don't.
Mm,
It was really interesting when she appeared at my hotel door that I looked like her except for the eyes. And I know that
wow.
probably my eyes looked like my father. And
Mm,
by that time, don't know who my father was, so, and it wasn't. She wasn't going to talk about it. And
okay.
then after 3 days, she said, "I never told my husband about you, and I can't have a relationship with you, so we're done." And
Yeah.
I
After
know, and it's
three
like,
after 3 days
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
and well, because we spent some time together, and I realize at least there was a lot of nature nurture there. For me, there was a lot
Yes.
of nature. We had very similar, even similar tastes. It was kind of weird.
Oh
But we
really?
had very similar mannerisms, speech
Mm,
cadences, things like that. Yeah. But this was a secret. I was a secret. And I think that possibly her brother said, "You left this girl once, you can't do it again." Something. I'm sure I think that there was an element of coercion there for her to actually meet me.
yes.
And
I'm
so
sorry.
after, and then we parted ways, and I never contacted
I
her
mean,
again.
it's like one of those things you'll never know the full story, but clearly to keep it a secret from her
Her,
husband. I
her
mean, there's
husband, and I have two
that's
half sisters somewhere. Well, actually, I know where they are. That's another story. But yeah, I've got
yeah,
two half sisters in America.
gosh. I mean, yeah, it's one thing I know now through doing this project is that creating your own family, your chosen family, like blood is it's not the most important thing.
It is
It
not.
really isn't.
It is not.
No.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
have some really
yeah.
dear friends in Seattle and also here in New Zealand. We call each other sisters from other misters, 'cause
Oh, I
that's what
love
we are.
that.
Yeah.
That's
It's just,
awesome.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
it took me, I had a lot of unpacking to do after
of
that
course, of
because I
course.
was at that point when I met her, I was 24. And
Mm,
that was, abandonment has been an issue for me all my life. Just
of
now
course.
getting my heart around that. Yeah, so it took me a while to figure out,
Yes.
to unravel the thread of this is her,
Yeah.
this is not
Mm,
you, this
mm,
is not some flaw
absolutely.
about you. And it took a while.
That's it.
you know.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm doing some of that unraveling myself with my own family, and what I am very much realizing is it's not about you. It's not about me. It's
Mm-hmm.
so much about the other people in the dynamic of
It
our
is.
family. And
Yes.
it's a hard thing to come to terms with, because you know, when you're like a rational person, you're like, but there has to be a reason here. But actually, a lot of the times, it's not yours to you can't work this out. It's someone
Exactly.
else's, you
Exactly.
know, baggage,
Yeah.
someone else's
Mm-hmm.
trauma, someone else's
Mm-hmm.
story,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of, sadly, some kind of collateral
Collateral
damage. And
damage. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I think
and
that fundamentally, what I found has worked the best for me is just love. Just
mm,
love them. My poor biological mother was 17 years old in 1959 and pregnant. You can't imagine
right,
the kind of fear she went through. Just love her. I'm
mm,
just grateful she carried me to term and I had this amazing life. And
yeah,
it took me a long time to get there with my own parents and with her.
mm,
Just love them. Just love them.
yeah,
Good on you. You did the best you could.
yeah,
But it took me
yeah.
a
Oh,
long time. It was mostly
I mean,
because
yeah,
when you click with someone, which I think we did, and it's like, really? Okay.
yeah.
But she was
Oh, that,
so fearful of losing her present family
that's
and
it.
being exposed perhaps as someone that he didn't know,
Mm.
and
Oh,
that's
yeah,
that would have been
yeah.
very daunting and very frightening for her as well. So I
Yes.
could, I
Oh,
could see that.
yeah, there's so much fear that people,
Hmm.
they can't do the big thing, they can't do the courageous thing, so they just,
Hmm.
sadly, might treat you badly in the process of that. And
Hmm.
yeah, there's lots of folks in our community who have experienced this kind of trauma, and it takes a lot of time to work through this and process this, and creating that
Hmm.
chosen family, creating those connections, and building our lives with people who aren't our blood, is it can be even more incredible than if you know, you have, if you
Oh,
have a wonderful family, wonderful, brilliant, great. But if you
most
don't,
definitely.
we can create it ourselves. We
Absolutely.
can, we truly can.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and you're a
My
testament
family
to
in
that.
Seattle
Yeah,
was like that. Yeah, that was the hardest thing, is leaving
wonderful.
my family. I didn't have blood relatives in
Mm,
Seattle, but they were dear. They still are dear, dear close friends
yeah.
that I love dearly. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
tell me then, how did you get from Seattle to New Zealand?
That's a crazy story. I just, that's a long story. Long story short, I came over to Seattle to study the treaty. And because of the B&B I was staying at, they knew I was a teacher. They set up a meeting with the Ministry of Education woman. We got on like house on fire. She said, if you ever want to come back. So yeah. And I ended up moving up north and or not moving up north, but visiting up north at the time when I first visited to go on to study the treaty, which was signed up here in Waipapa. And that's why I came up here.
Okay,
And
right.
then during that time, I met a gentleman who was studying to be a teacher, and we just continued to correspond. And so the combination of, I always wanted to teach someplace where people didn't look like me. I already did that in
Mhm.
the States because I always taught in the African American
Right.
community. I was really comfortable with that. And I wanted
Mm,
to always teach someplace where I was a foreigner. So I thought,
mm,
oh, this could be fun. I'll take a year and do that. And then I met my partner, who wasn't my partner then. And it just all kind of into place. And I had an opportunity with a job and knowing someone here to move. And so because I'm a safety girl, I put a leave of absence in because I was teaching secondary school in Seattle and happy and tenured and all that.
right.
And I owned a home by that time, and I was all solid. I was really solid. I wasn't prepared to do any of this, and so I
Okay.
rented my house, and then I took a leave of absence on my job, and I
Mm,
jumped over here, and yeah, just he lived on a boat. I stayed with him on a boat. It was all kind of in flux for a while until finally
mm.
I made the decision to stay, and it was just a really good
Wow.
decision. And now he's my husband,
Oh,
and it was nice
okay.
because we were both old when we met. So, I was
Right.
47, he was 50, and he just turned
That's
70.
not old, girl.
Well, that's I know. Isn't that funny? I've learned that. It's just like I'm definitely not the
Oh yeah, but that's
67 my
that's
mother
the
was.
message that we get, right? That's the message
Oh,
that we get. It's like, oh, once you're in your 40s, right? You're done
uh,
for.
40s were beautiful. I love my 40s. But, I've loved,
Yes,
like I said, I've
yeah,
loved every decade.
yeah,
Yeah. So anyway,
absolutely.
so now we've made a home together and a life together. And I've been in the
Yeah.
community for almost 20 years teaching up here.
Wow.
And I just retired 2024. And that
Mm.
was because of 42 years. And then I had a health thing where the universe was saying, stop, you need to stop. Because I have a titanium hip that I got 12 years ago. And that
Wow.
was as a result of a bike accident, long, long time ago, long story.
Okay.
And I dislocated it in
Oh
2023. I was buckling my shoe and it popped out. And,
no.
I'm clinging to the chair thinking, why is this
Oh
happening? And I get the real clear message with the voices in my head. It
yeah.
means you need to stop now.
Slow
You
down.
need to stop.
Yeah.
It's time. It's time. 42 years is
Mm.
plenty of time to teach. Move on. So yeah,
Yes.
so that's the life now. And
Oh.
I'm using my counseling degree now, and I've opened a small counseling practice in town where I'm just seeing a few clients, just because I needed to do something after a year and a half of rattling around in the house. I didn't mind it; it was fun. But I needed just a
Yeah.
little bit of a reason to get out of the house, and I find that
Makes sense.
I think I do good work. So with counseling, so yeah, it's been quite rewarding so far.
I remember in your story, Esther, when you wrote, let me just bring it up here if I can read it. You said that teaching was my calling, and because I wasn't divided by the demands of a traditional nuclear family, I could pour my soul into thousands of students who became my living legacy. And that, it
Absolutely,
just like, it's such an
absolutely, absolutely,
incredible words. But that's it.
absolutely.
You've given so many other people this incredible gift, like you said.
I
And I
feel
mean,
like
this
that.
idea of, yeah, legacy is like a blood
Hmm.
thing. I just think we need to expand this so much. And you are
I
such an
do
incredible
too.
example of
I do
that,
too.
you
I get
know?
a lot of feedback from former students. I have former students looking
Oh,
me up and emailing me. It's been lovely.
oh,
I've
you're
really, and I've
amazing.
had so many students say, "You changed my life," or "I
Wow.
can't believe that all the what you did. You have no idea what you did for me." And it was just lovely. It was lovely. But I was that kid. I was that kid that, and
Mm.
when I think about it, one of the reasons why I did get into teaching was because when I was in second grade, I had a horrible teacher.
Oh,
I never had
really?
one of those great teachers. A lot of teachers have
Yeah.
these inspiring teacher stories. Not me. No, I didn't
No.
have any inspiring teachers, but I had a second grade teacher who was a little small, little gangly, little uncomfortable, insecure girl in second grade,
Mm.
7 years old. And I moved from San Francisco to Sacramento when I was little, and San Francisco schools were far ahead. So I got into first grade in Sacramento, and I was just tearing up the classroom because I knew all the stuff. And so
Right.
I was not, clearly they had a meeting about me somewhere and said, we got to get Esther out of first. Because she's just ridiculous. So they put me
Oh,
into second grade, and this teacher she was horrible. It's almost like she needed to take me down a peg or something, because in those
oh,
days, first graders had consumable math book. This is probably my math phobia. And so you write in the math book, right? Because you write the answers and
okay.
then you tear the pages out and you get a gold star. Well, in second
Oh,
grade, all bets are off on that one. They give you a textbook and then you have to copy the problems. Well, I had never done that in
right.
my whole life. It's like, whoa, okay. So I'm looking around and I copied the problems because I thought that's what you had to do. And then I was going to go back and answer them, right? Recess bell rang. And I went to my teacher and I said, I haven't got any of the answers. I've just copied all the problems. And she just kind of, screwed up her face. And I went off to recess. And after recess, I came back in and she said, I'm going to embarrass somebody today because somebody just copied all of the problems and didn't have any answers. And so now she has no
No.
answers. And I'm like the smallest
What?
child. I'm the youngest child in
Oh,
that classroom, right?
so
I'm brand
cruel.
new in the classroom and she just smacked me down. And I can
Oh,
remember just
God.
being so mortified because
Of
nobody's
course.
no, and this was and so she's always been my role model. Is that's the
Right.
teacher I
Not
am never going to be. And
oh my God. Yeah.
but there's, you have to say, I'm very proud of my profession, and there are a lot of teachers like that out there.
Yeah.
So if I was
Yeah.
to give any advice to anybody who's got child age children, you can do this, especially in the United States. Never put your child into a classroom where you haven't sat in the back of that classroom first. Really and truly. Do it.
Mm,
You as a parent
that's
have a right to
amazing
do that.
advice.
Sit back in the back. Just
Wow.
watch the teacher. You get to do that.
Mm,
And I would never, if I had a child of my own, I would never put a kid in any classroom. I would be sitting first week
yeah.
every year, sitting in the back of the class,
Gosh.
watch the teacher, just for a
I
day.
mean, it's amazing advice. Amazing because yeah, they're just people. Again, they're
Yeah.
just people. Some are great,
Teachers,
some are not
yeah.
great.
But
Like every
teachers can,
profession.
they can do, there are some teachers that get into teaching because they want to tell people what to do.
Right.
And they can do a lot of harm. They can do a lot of
Of
harm.
course. Of
Yeah.
course. I mean,
Yeah.
those are the formative years of our lives. And
Absolutely.
if
And
if you get someone like that, oh,
it's serious. You need to take that
mm,
job
yeah.
seriously. It's a privilege to teach other people's children, and
Mm.
it's a huge responsibility.
I think the thing that really saddens me, especially looking at how America is going, is
Oh,
how little they value teaching. I mean, when
mhm.
you hear you see teachers doing crowdfunding for office supplies,
I,
and
I
you're like,
spent
what?
thousands of dollars. you know, I
Seriously,
remember
you're
doing
like,
I
wow,
remember doing my taxes one time, and you give you this little $250 stipend, which I think they've taken away now. But I
yeah,
used to just laugh and just
it's
think.
crazy.
I remember my ex-husband saying, "We can't afford for you to be a teacher."
I mean, it's this is even more frustrating because you're like, okay, you want people to have kids. You tell
Mhm.
the whole world how valuable it is to have children and all of this
We don't
shit,
value children.
and you don't
We don't
value
value them. No,
children. You
no,
don't value their care.
no,
You
no,
don't give like parents support. You don't give mothers
nothing.
support,
They
teacher
just throw
support.
you in the deep
It's
end.
right.
Yeah. And
It's
if
baffling.
I could just get on a little soapbox with teaching, I got to tell you, for
Do
25
it.
years, I actually taught in the United States. And I've seen now what you're looking at politically now is the
Yeah.
result of a
Mm,
fundamentally intentional system to dumb down America. Because
right.
every year for 25 years, at the end of the year, we got handed a new budget for the next year that was at least 10% less every year. And they would say, you all figure out how to do as much or more with less. And then let us know what
Crazy.
you're doing.
Crazy.
For at least for all the years that I taught, they diminished. I mean, I used to teach high school civics. That went out the window. And then you wonder why
Oh,
people don't
yeah.
understand how the electoral
Mm,
college works, or
right.
why they can't.
Yeah.
It's just because
Yeah.
they didn't want them to.
Yeah.
They have been dumbing down the United States
Mm.
education system for decades, and I was in it. I watched it.
Ugh,
They cut funding over and over again on purpose.
it's
It's
yeah,
deliberate,
it's
dumbing
horrifying
down. Yeah,
because yeah, I get people without education, you can't make good choices for your life, can you? You
exactly.
can't.
Education got
You,
me out of. I had a different
right.
life path until university.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
education is more than just learning facts, as you know. Education resets your brain into a higher level of critical thinking.
Absolutely. Mm,
You learn to analyze
yeah.
things, you learn to become skeptical and discerning. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts about, you were child free in a time where it was really unusual. It was unusual for women back then to say, I don't want to do this. And like you said, like there's 8 people who come into your workplace who are pregnant. Now we are seeing fertility rates are dropping and it feels like there's a shift. Women are going, actually, I'm not sure I want to do this. But I mean, can you feel that kind of change? Do you have,
Yeah.
an idea of that change? Yeah.
I do. And this is me being optimistic. I always used to tell my students this too, even the last years I was teaching. For the last 2 decades, I taught geography, which gives you a real interesting window to the world. And as you know, the higher the education level and the better the lifestyle of a woman in a country, the more prosperous a country is. That's just bottom line. That's
Right.
statistically been proven.
Yes.
At that point, the question was, how did I feel at that time? I didn't feel it as much as I think many people who have siblings do, or I
Mm,
disconnected myself from a lot of that quite early on. I think a lot of my friends were in the LGBTQ community, and
mm,
most of my friends had no children, so I didn't get a lot of pushback. It was interesting. My now husband, he's had children. The youngest one was
mm.
16 when I met him, and it was interesting. The biggest pushback I got was from them.
Really?
And after they became pregnant, and because he has two daughters, after they became pregnant and in their pregnancy, and it was like I was like the adjunct. It was the dad's wife. And I was never interested in being their mom. I had their moms. But, when
Yeah.
they were pregnant, they would come and visit. And I remember one of the daughters saying to me, well, we decided, her sister and her, we decided that you didn't have children because you couldn't have children, you know? And
Stop.
yeah, and it was so interesting because it was so directly and overtly said to me, and it's like, really?
Wow.
And I reflected back on all the times that probably other women thought that as well, but were just too polite to say it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I actually, because my father said don't come home, I terminated the pregnancy. So I knew that wasn't a problem, that there was nothing wrong physically with me. I just
Yeah.
made a choice. And I know it's really sad, for women that desperately want children and physically aren't able to have them. And so it probably feels a little as if I'm squandering an opportunity that I had to have kids,
Hmm.
because they weren't able to. But again, like you said before, that's their pathway.
Yeah.
It's not mine.
Yeah.
And when I terminated that pregnancy, I was 16, very young in those days, and terrified,
Yes.
terrified, and fully
Of
intended
course.
in those days that I would go on to have children. There was no reason why I
Gosh.
wouldn't, because it was just easy. It was successful, if you call it that. I read about all these women, especially when you overlay the patriarchal monotheistic religion on it, they regretted it, and it's like, no, it wasn't. My belief
No.
system isn't that, and so I
No.
believe that
Mm-mm.
you welcome a child into your body when their soul is ready to come in, and
Right.
we just terminated that agreement. I'm really okay with that,
Yes.
and feel so grateful because I
Yes.
was not in a place to raise a child on my own in the street, because
No.
that's where I would be
Of
doing it.
course not. I
And
mean, yeah. No.
I went to
It's.
that's why Planned Parenthood, they saved my life, because I was a terrified
Mm,
child, 16,
right.
rolled in to get a pregnancy test at Planned Parenthood because they were the only ones that did it in those days. And
Mm,
I remember just bursting into tears. I had no idea, because to be honest with you, I was naive, I was young. I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest with you.
right.
I didn't.
Mm,
And that's why I fight so hard for sex education at early ages for children, particularly
gosh. Yeah.
girls, because
Mm,
there was so much information I didn't have. I can remember my girlfriend telling me, well, if you do it in the bathtub, you won't get pregnant. And I
oh
remember
God.
in that split second
Oh.
regretting that I didn't do it in the bathtub. It's like, oh my gosh. And
Oh.
it was
Yeah.
ridiculous stuff because we had no organized sex education. And my parents certainly weren't talking to me about it. And so, I
Yeah.
went into Planned Parenthood, and she said, you have options. And I said,
Mm,
what options? I have no options. Yes. And I'll never forget her face. She was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She had this beautiful brown curly hair and deep, beautiful, warm, nurturing brown eyes. And she held my hand and she said, there are other things you can do. And she explained it all to me. And she was
oh.
there when I had my abortion. And I don't know her name anymore. I wish she knew, but she saved my life. She saved my life.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, this is why reproductive health care is it. We,
It's
we can't
healthcare.
have our lives if we
Yeah.
can't have access to these procedures, and it's just we see this being weaponized and used as a political football now,
Oh,
and then
exactly.
you know
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
when Roe versus Wade was
Oh,
overturned, my
yeah.
heart broke. I think
Oh,
billions of women around the world, our hearts broke
oh,
because
yes. Yes.
we got there because of women not accepting it, fighting for it, getting out in the
Yeah.
streets, losing their
Yeah.
lives for these things. Like our rights
Absolutely.
didn't come easily. And I mean,
Absolutely. It was
it,
hard
I
fought.
just,
No, it was,
there are
and
many of us out there who we're not going to go back, but it's
no.
just, this is a quote unquote blip. We will keep going and we'll keep fighting. You imagine what would your life have been like if you didn't
Well,
have that amazing
that's,
person, Planned
oh,
Parenthood?
that's what I was
You
going to
know?
say is, I would
Yeah.
have been an unwed mother at 16, probably not having a home, because my dad said, if you ever become pregnant, don't come home. And he made that really clear many times. And here I was. And so I would have been an unwed mother, who knows, on the streets. And
Yeah.
I think more than that, what I think about a lot in my life is I never would have become a teacher, and I never would have
Mm,
touched those thousands of lives. I would
mm,
never have made that kind of difference. And I would have taken my own dysfunction, added it to the life of the child, and raised
right.
another generation of dysfunction.
Right.
So I can't think of any positive about that. And then part of it
No.
too is I had an early tragedy when I was 22. My best friend of all the people on the planet for me to lose, he was killed.
Mm.
It's just
Oh,
a
I'm
dear,
sorry,
dear
Esther.
friend. And no, it was one of those crossroads moments.
Yeah.
It's like,
Mm.
okay, you can either just wallow in this and just make your life not count, or you can just, he didn't have his life. So
Right.
don't piss your life against the wall, essentially, is what I thought to myself.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I made it count. And that was really significant to me, that I wanted to
Mm.
go on and make sure I made a difference. It was really important that I made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I did. I wouldn't have with a child.
You
And I know it's
absolutely
possible
did.
to with a child, but I know it's
Mm.
harder because, as you say,
Absolutely.
women are not supportive. They love the
No.
idea of you getting pregnant,
No.
but then
Mm.
you're on your own once the baby's there. Or even cutting benefits for single mothers and food benefits, and it's ridiculous in the United States right now. So,
Yeah, it's this. I think they just think women are really dumb and that we're gonna completely, I mean, well, like we were talking about the education system, the whole point is to make people not educated. But
absolutely.
we watch how they talk about mothers and the lack of any kind of parental leave, all of these
Oh,
things.
oh,
And then they
yeah.
will say, "Oh, but we want you to have more children. We want you to go out there and have three, four, five kids." And it's, are you serious? Like, it's just, to me, it's infuriating. It's like, are you
Well,
serious?
it's a way to control. So,
Yeah.
bottom line, the idea of a woman with agency is ridiculously threatening to the patriarchy, which is what we're still in. I
Yes.
suspect that might be coming to an end, which is why they're kicking so hard.
Right.
And women, I talk with my husband about this all the time. I've learned he's lovely because his children love him. And
Yeah.
it really helped me understand the level of neglect I lived with. Because his
Right.
children would come around and visit, and they'd visit all the time. And I remember just talking to him one time, and I'm an only child, so I'm kind of autonomous. I've always been kind of like
Right.
this. And
Mm.
finally said, "Why do they come around?" And I realized that my childhood was the anomaly.
Got it. Yeah.
He was involved in his children's life. His children are involved in their
Mm.
children's life. That's what you do when you're parent. But it
Got
was
it.
something I
It
hadn't
was
experienced.
alien to
Exactly,
you.
exactly. So I had to
Yeah.
kind of, realign myself to realize that my childhood was not the normal one. I thought
Got it.
the few parents that I observed that liked their children and was involved with every aspect of their lives was the
Mm.
anomaly. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
was able to flip that on its head. It's kind of funny.
Interesting. Oh, yeah, very. So then maybe we can just talk about a few of the, like, the really positive things about the life that you've created. Like, where do you find your joy?
I think I can draw on a lot of threads that bring me joy. Travel was my first joy because by nature, I really love learning. I attribute that to being a double Aquarian. So I am an Aquarius moon, Aquarius sun. So I love learning and I love
Me too.
other people. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I'm quite an introvert. So
Mm.
I don't like jumping into the bar. I love observing people. I love
Right.
observing different cultures. I
Mm.
love diversity. I love when somebody can reflect a different experience back to me and
Mm.
allow me to be curious about that and ask them, so how was that? So, yeah, my joy comes from traveling because I've traveled a lot and I've traveled to
Yes.
really interesting places. Most of my travel I've done by myself in my life, which I really love. There's an
Mm.
experience that happens when you travel by yourself that is really different than when you have the advantage of being a little unit going
Yes.
around. So traveling by myself has been just a joy, and I can say I have just become a different person than that little girl that grew up in second grade. It's changed
Mm.
me completely. And part of my joy has been teaching. And it's not the relating facts to students, it's the little diamond moments that you get every day in the classroom
Mm.
where you explain something and either you get that little light flash in the kid's face, or you can say what I often would do is like, okay, who doesn't get this? Who does and can say it better than me? Some kid will jump into it
Yeah.
and everybody will go, yeah. And I'll go, yay, there we go. And getting just students are amazing. And the
Mm.
last half of my career I spent with secondary students. So, teenagers. And,
Yeah.
teenagers get a bad rap. Teenagers are the best because they're so
Yeah.
raw honesty out their mouth all the time.
Right.
If you're being inconsistent, if you're being disingenuous, they call it. They've got that spidey
Yeah.
sense. They call it. And
Mm.
I love that. I love being congruent. They force you to be congruent. And I love
Mm.
that. And so that's been a real joy. I remember one of my students, it was before I dislocated and I was still going on. And my partner is also a teacher. So, and the two of us were at the same school. And I always said, well, I'm not going to retire until he does. And I remember one of my students, bless her heart, she said, oh, you'll never retire, miss. And I said, oh, why do you
Uh,
say that? And she said, because you'll miss us too much.
oh,
And it was just,
yeah,
I think,
amazing.
I think what some teachers don't realize is you won't get anywhere with a student unless they really know you care about them,
Right.
you know,
Mm.
and you have to care about them. You have to like them.
Yeah.
You
Mm.
have to be unintimidated by them. When they get
Yeah.
all up in your face and tell you something, you're going to have to say, okay, where do you get that? What makes you think that? You have
Mm.
to, teenagers expect you to have a conversation with them,
Mm.
and I was pretty good at that. And I like doing that. So I think that's been a joy. Yeah. It's interesting. I make very strong connections with students, with my friends, my family. I had a very small nuclear family. Just my mother and father. They both passed on. I have no blood relatives left in North America. I still have some relations in Germany. My family was not, like you say, my family of choice are the people that I'm close to now. And yeah, I would say the planet gives me joy. I'm
Mm.
always, I'm always amazed at the depth of experience and love and compassion I find in human beings.
Mm.
They're just really,
Yeah.
no matter what anybody says, the people at the top right now are an anomaly. They're
Right.
they're not
Yeah.
they're not a typical
Yes.
human being, at least not
Mm.
of the species that I'm familiar with. Like, I'll give you just a real small example. I slept in my car on the top of a hill when we flooded in
Oh
Thursday
yeah.
because I couldn't get
Oh
back
yeah.
home. It was just crazy.
Mm.
And I'm in front of a small convenience store that's closed and a house across the street. But when I finally figured out I had to sleep there overnight and I wasn't going to get back until the tide came down, I was a little concerned that I was all by myself. I was a woman. There were a
Mm.
few shirtless men driving back and forth in the truck. And I thought, and as a woman, as a woman, you always have to do a little extra. And
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, touch wood, I've never been assaulted, but part of that is because I've got a really good sense of like, how can I
Right.
mitigate this before it gets, out of control? So,
Mm-hmm.
I got out of my truck before it got dark and I walked across the street to the only house that was in the area. And I just stood on the driveway. The dog started barking. The woman came out and I said, I just wanted you to know I'm sleeping in my car across the street. Immediately, she's like, do you need a hot drink? Do you want to use my shower? Do you
Oh,
want to? It was just, she didn't know
bless
me from Eve,
her.
but boom, there
Yeah.
it goes. And I
Yes.
said,
Yeah.
I'm really fine. I just wanted you to know.
Oh.
And if anything happens, I'll honk the horn. And she said, oh, my dog will hear you. She was so gorgeous. And I said, and by that time,
Oh.
through unseen circumstances, I was silly and I'd left my lights on, so my battery was dead. So I said, but I will
Oh.
ask you, could you please jump my car in the morning? And She said, oh, yeah. I come to find out later when I visited her again in the morning, her partner had come out at 4:30 in the morning and parked there and watched me and stayed for 2 hours before he had to
What?
leave for work to make sure that if I was awake, which actually I was, and
Yeah.
I wish I'd gone out to see him because I wasn't sure he was
Oh,
partner, but he had stayed there just to make sure that he could jump me while he was still before he left for work.
stop.
So that's the kind,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I have found
Yeah.
that kind of human compassion
Yes.
all over the planet. I've been to Turkey, I've been to
Same.
India, I've been to
Same.
Southeast Asia. People are like that. That's their
Yeah.
default. No matter what anybody tells you,
Yes.
they're mistaken. The default
Right.
of humanity is compassion and
Mm-hmm.
love. We all love, we all grieve, we all celebrate births, we all are saddened by death. We all have so much in common. And if we would just step back and
Mm.
realize that gets us this thing.
Yeah, we'd have a good, yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah,
Traveling and meeting people, you just see that we are all the same. And
we are.
we've had the most kindness from strangers, complete who
Absolutely.
don't even know us. That
Exactly.
instantly they're like, "How can I help you?" And
Exactly.
it just and you
That's,
realize all of the crap that we hear on the news, that we
oh,
see on social media, the
yeah.
fear mongering, it's all
Oh,
there to distract you, to,
manipulate and control.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And like you said, the
Yeah,
people at the very top, they are in the minority, but
they are.
they can be very loud with all of their resources. They can be very loud,
Yeah.
but we have to block that out because, yeah,
Well,
there's
and
so
link
much more good in the
arms.
world.
We need to link arms
Yes.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a, I
Absolutely.
know one of the things that it feels like is so threatening to monotheism is community,
Right.
is
Yes.
community that doesn't
Yeah.
look like you. And the key to
Yes.
all of this is community. I'm
Mm.
part of consider was essentially a community of color, and I'm very much part of the Maori community up here in Northland, New Zealand. And
Incredible.
we had a celebration for my partner, and it was just gorgeous to look out at the group that came to our house, and everybody was looking different, and
Wow.
we were all doing karaoke together. It was just beautiful, and I thought, yeah, this
Oh,
is
it
it.
sounds
This is
amazing.
it. Yeah, yeah. And we have this thing that in the Maori culture has a thing called tangi, which is a
Mhm.
funeral rite. And when someone dies, then everybody comes out. They take your body back to your original marae, which is your home kind of place,
Mm.
and they acknowledge you for 3 days or more, and
Wow.
um, and everybody has a marae, everybody has a place to go to. And we were joking because there's a family that I've been friends with for almost 20 years now, and one of the first people I met, and we were joking, and I said, well, I'm an honorary, like said their name anyway, and they said, of course you are, and I said, well, when I
Oh.
die, I'm going to your marae, right? And she said, oh, we got you, we're taking you, you're at our marae, and it's
Oh, that's
and to
amazing.
have somebody say that to you is an incredible honor, just incredible honor,
Yes.
you
I
know,
imagine so.
because it
Wow.
just, yeah. So it was so, and I said, oh, I'm so glad because that's where I want to be,
Right.
So
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, because we're told community is a big topic in the child-free world because we're told that we'll
yeah.
be alone when we're older. We will die lonely, meaningless lives.
Mm.
No one will be around us. And, what would you say
Nothing
to
could be
people?
further from the
Mhm.
truth. And I think that was part of the reason, like in my 40s, I realized, you look around. I had a really good friend who was one of 6 children. His father had already had a stroke, horribly dysfunctional family. He was alone.
Mm,
Everybody was alone. He had 6 kids
right.
and nobody showed up. My friend
Okay.
showed up out of obligation, not because they thought that
Mm,
this person was so fine they wanted to show up for them.
yes.
It was, yeah. Children do not guarantee that you're going to be lonely. And, even
No.
conversely, I've had so many people my age cling to their own children and expect them to take care of them. And it's like,
Right.
how can you ask someone to give up their life for you? You
Yeah.
created a life, sent them out into the world, roots and wings, and then you expect them to come back and take care of you. That's
Yeah.
counterintuitive to me. Because it's like
Yes.
the dandelion
Same.
seed. Once you blow on it, off they go.
Yeah.
And that's
Yes.
similar to my teaching. I always call all my
Mm.
students the light in the world. I said,
Oh,
you're in
yeah.
my classroom for this amount of time, and then
Yeah.
I'm sending you off, and you're the lights in the world that I can watch,
Oh,
and all your little
wow.
lights are blinking at me. I can see you all in the world, and that's where you're going. You're a light in the world for me. And I think that's the way parenting should be. So there's no obligation
Agreed.
for a child to come back and
No.
take care of you. And there shouldn't be. That's not our
Mm-mm.
role as children. Our role is to
Mm-mm.
go out
No.
and make the world better. So,
Absolutely. Is there any advice that you could give then, Esther? Because people are always like, how do I build this community? Do you have any advice of what's worked for you or what? Because you're an introvert as well. So,
very much an introvert. Well, remember the definition of an introvert, because one of the things at grad school, we first thing I had to do is take the
Mm.
Myers-Briggs. So I'm an INTJ.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, so and introvert extrovert is the way you fill up. I can go to a
Got
party,
it.
and then I need to go home, and I need to close the
Right. Middle
door, and I need to
included. Yeah.
exactly I need to just fill up again.
Got it.
But yeah,
Yeah.
most teachers are introverts. It's really interesting. They don't, and most people
It
don't
is.
believe I'm an introvert because I talk so much. But I think it's just like I enjoy people. I really enjoy people.
Yes,
Um,
that makes sense.
Advice, I think my community and my support arrived with me organically. The through line for it is that I do enjoy people. And I do, early on, I learned to appreciate people. So I think that was
Right.
part of it. So I think stay congruent within yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
when your friends are quacking about babies and husbands, it might be time to move into your own space, reflect, and decide what's yours and what's not yours. One thing
Mm.
that I love the tradition, I honor people that go through it. But you think, unfortunately, a wedding is such a setup for women because you get to
Oh
be
yeah.
queen for a day. You're queen for a
Yes.
day, and you've got the gown, and you've got the crown, and and
Right.
everybody. And it's just such a setup because
Yeah.
you, and so there is that time, and I went through it too between 18 and 38, 28, when everybody's a bride.
Right.
Everybody's
Right.
then everybody has having a baby shower, and I think that's the hardest time because your hormones are kicking in too, and you're
Yes.
looking at it and going, should I be doing this? I feel like I should be doing
Mm.
this, but there's something inside of you going, I think I want to just do something also. And
Yes.
I think just staying, observing who you are, supporting that sense of self that you're growing,
Mm.
and then checking in with yourself over and over again. I think that really
Right.
helps. And then what I found is you draw people to you that are like
Mm.
minded. I've always
Yeah.
found that, and it doesn't matter where on the planet you are. You always draw people. You've met some amazing people traveling, and the things that we talk about are just amazing. I've had some amazing conversations over the years
I
with
bet.
people. Is yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that just stay, if you can
Yes.
stay, that old, to thine own self be true, that actually has some merit, but you have to do the work. It doesn't come easily.
That's it.
You have
Mm-hmm.
to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep
Yes.
checking, especially when you're young, when you don't have that. Like, I've got a real sense of who I am now, but I've been on the
Right.
planet for over 6 decades. But when you're young,
Right.
you don't. When you're young, it's
Mm.
really difficult because you tend to be a reflection of your family system. So
Yes.
I think it really is helpful for all women, especially right now, to
Mm.
check in with themselves and find out who you are at your core. What does your soul say? Like you say, what gives you joy? What makes your heart
Yes.
sing? And when you start to be able to discern that in your world, it becomes a lot easier because
Mm.
you start to
Yep.
come, you encounter people and you go, yep, they're my tribe. Nope, they're not. So you've got people that
Yes.
are polite conversation, move on, and people that, yeah, I'm going to pursue
Yeah.
this. And then you find people that you fall in love with over and over again. I've got a lot of people that
Oh.
I fell in love with and still am in love with, people
Oh.
that, yeah. So I feel really, really blessed. I can't
Yes.
even, and I got to tell you, that 16-year-old girl, I would have never you couldn't, I would have never painted this life. I would have never
Wow.
been able to even conceive that I've had this
Oh,
life. It's just, I'm so grateful. I can't even
yeah.
tell you. Even driving back home after the floods, when the water went down, I could get through the roads.
Yes. Yeah.
The mist rising from the mountains, such the sunrise.
Oh.
It was just like, oh, and I just thought, I'm so blessed. What a life I've got, you know?
Mm.
And I know
Oh
children
gosh.
can add a layer for some people. I
Mm.
think just my freedom added that layer for me. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
left America if I had family or children over there. I wouldn't have had the freedom to come here,
That's
and
it.
find new love
Mm.
at 47. I
Mm.
wouldn't have done it, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, no, I don't think so, Esther. I think you've lived such an incredibly full life and you've worked hard to make it happen. It hasn't just fallen on your lap. You've worked really hard
No.
to build it and you're reaping the rewards of that right now, which is so incredible to see. And I know
So,
your story is going to resonate and help
well,
help so many women out there, you know,
well, remember,
people out
it's an
there.
inside job. That's kind of my, it's an inside job. Nobody
Right.
can make you happy, not even kids, not
That's
even a
it.
partner.
That's it.
Only
Mhm.
you can make you happy. And it doesn't
Right.
matter the circumstances. You can be, and I've been challenged by circumstances that haven't been optimal. It's an inside job. It's what you take
Yeah.
from it. Okay,
Mm.
how this is not what I would have chosen. How can I react to it where I'm going to have a positive
That's it.
outcome? Over and over
Mhm.
again, that's what you do. It's an inside job,
Yeah.
And I
Mm.
think
Oh,
we're taught as women, maybe men too, but I didn't have that experience in this lifetime. So I think we're taught as women in this lifetime to place our happiness in other,
mm.
place our happiness in a
Absolutely.
marriage, in children, in doing the
Yep.
traditional family thing, in being an upstanding member of the community. All those things
Yeah.
that we are instead of, at the soul level.
Yeah. Exactly. That's it. We have to shed all of that and find it from ourselves
Mm-hmm.
within.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish
Mm-hmm.
it would have, for myself, I wish I could have got there sooner, you know, because you have this messaging from such a young age. It takes time to build that confidence
It
to
really
go,
does. It really
it's in
does.
me. It's not from anyone else. It's in me that I find this. But
Exactly.
I know sharing stories like yours is going to help
Absolutely.
younger people so
I hope
much. They're
I hope
gonna,
so. I hope
oh,
so. Well, and
absolutely, Esther,
because
absolutely.
also remember when you're young, you're not getting those messages. You're getting the
No, not at
messages to
all.
support the system. You're getting the
Oh yeah,
messages to, oh, my friends are getting
mm,
married and all my friends are having babies. So this is what I'm doing
right.
too. So you're getting these counterintuitive messages. And
Yeah,
I think that there are a lot of women, like I said before, that have children that maybe might have made a different decision if they were supported in that different decision. Not to
yeah,
mean that people don't love their kids, because they do. I've seen that. But at the same time, I always wonder how many kids we would
same.
have. And
Mm,
I think
yeah.
the work that you're doing is amazing. The work that you're doing,
Oh,
I can see is so valuable. I hope my story helps, but you being able to kind of,
absolutely.
curate some of these stories, put them in one place. It's just lovely to
Oh,
actually
oh,
see that you're doing this work. You're inspiring.
thank you, Esther. I
So,
mean, this is where I get my joy. So,
I
so
bet.
I
I
am,
bet. Yeah.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
and I see it as an honor to be able to speak to people like you and share that with our community, the wider world. And I do think that it's going to change the world for the better.
I
We
think so
need to
too.
hear
I think so too.
stories like yours out there in the
Yeah.
world. So,
Well, let
yeah,
me tell
we're
you,
going to keep going.
I've got, I taught high school for the last 20 years, and I'm telling you, the girls are changing. The girls are
That
changing.
that makes me happy.
And I
That makes me
tell the
happy.
kids that, kids will say, gosh, miss, because especially my girls, they would say, it's just looking bad here. Because I taught geography, so I would teach
Right.
geography. Also, I have a real good sense of Putin thing for years. I was saying, keep
Oh
an eye
yeah.
on him. He's dangerous. It's a
Mhm.
little like Hitler to me. But
Right.
as a geography
Yeah.
teacher, that's right there in the classroom with me. And the kids sometimes they get hopeless because the world looks kind of bleak
Mm,
when they're looking at it from their perspective. And I'll say to them, I've been in this for 40 years now, and you guys look really different than my kids 40 years ago. You guys have more awareness.
yes.
Also, they have a stronger sense of social justice. And for
Mm,
some reason, they have been able to open their lens more than the kids that I used to teach. They can see the
Right.
whole picture. They don't settle for things. They're
Mm.
not so willingly ready to march in the same step as the people before them. So I'm hopeful.